Right here on Inside Politics with my panelists Rita Oyer, Javas Bigambo and Dismas Bukua. And that issue of the BBI, we couldn't expand of the discussion just before the break. Dismas, I cut you short, but allow me to bring in Rita to actually respond to some of the things you were saying. I could see you shake your head as Dismas
Yes. I was shaking my head because indeed there are some good things that were in the BBI. And we used to call them the carrot and the stick. The carrot was fabulous, including the 35%. In fact, I think Kenya Kwanza have challenged Parliament to have that 35% in this year's budget. Let's see Azimio and Jubilee, who had it in BBI, reject it. Mm-hmm. Let's test it, because it's possible. The HELB matter, you've seen the presidential candidate, William Ruto, say it's possible. Let's do it. It doesn't need a BBI. Mm-hmm. More than half of those propositions did not need such an expensive and emotionally traumatizing process like Building Bridges initiative, yet they could be affected just by a parliamentary majority, you know.
And of course, there's one issue that we've not even talked about because it was not subject to of the petition of the Supreme Court. The issue of inclusivity, and what we get to hear a lot on the campaign platforms is about the fact that one side wanted to create positions, probably, but there are those who argue, Javas, that the BBI as it was and that provision or proposal to have more positions, to help more people get positions of power, that probably that is one of the things that would have benefited both formations, political formations as they currently stand, because each is at a loss on how to accommodate every other bigwig within their circle, don't you think?
Well, I think that inclusivity is a very good thing. And as a matter of fact, as a country, we need it. We need to be all-inclusive. We need a country and a platform and platforms and a legal framework that brings everybody together. But let's face it, Indomoli, even if we had gone to the referendum and then had an expanded executive and then got to have president there, prime minister, 2 deputies, etc., and even cabinet secretaries appointed from amongst members of the National Assembly. Would that have been inclusive enough? With about 43 ethnic groups in this country, how inclusive are only about 8 executive positions? We know very well that what is at stake, what is the problem in this country, is the skewed manner in which resources are allocated. Secondly, the raw and fettered ambition amongst politicians who want to use public and political office to amass wealth for aggrandizement and for preservation of personal wealth. As a matter of fact, if at all it's just a question of equitable distribution of resources in this country in such a manner that everybody feels that the government works in their interest at the national level and at the county level, we'll not be seeing people going for each other's jugular just because of political positions. And if at all we just get to have 2 deputies and 1 prime minister, how inclusive is that for our country? So what we need in terms of national healing, in terms of inclusive politics, is a framework, a polity as well, and a national consciousness that now, look, the fact that, for instance, I'm president does not mean that I'll pool and direct resources and opportunities only for to persons that are coming from the region or my ethnic extraction. That is where the problem is. The problem is the leaders that we have.
Okay.
Now, for example, in the US, I've said it before, that most vice presidents came from the state of Indiana, compared to many other states. I've not heard the people of Indiana said that, for example, they have benefited much more, or only those states where they have produced presidents to the disadvantage of the other states. We need national leaders, we need presidents, we need governors that will direct resources equitably for the greater good and the benefit of residents in the entire country and in the entire county.
Okay, but this must, the understanding is that this issue was perhaps the main reason why even BBI came into being in the first place, having an expanded executive, because there is that inability to actually bring politicians together under one roof, and probably this is what was going to sort out the problem for the political principles, and in this case I'm talking about Kenya Kwanza and Azimio la Umoja, that BBI was going to be beneficial to both sides of the political divide, whether or not they appear publicly to be supporting it, yet secretly they were hoping that it would pass. Do you think that therefore at this point where we stand now is that we are at a loss on how to secure the coalitions that we have currently?
Absolutely, we are at a loss. If you speak to the so-called principles, the leadership of Azimio la Umoja and the leadership of Kenya Kwanza, all of them in private will tell you that they love the content of BBI as far as expanding the national leadership is concerned, because that is what creates political stability in Kenya. And for any nation to grow, for a state to grow, number one, you need defense and security stability. Then you need this political stability, which will give you economic stability. Now, in the absence of political stability, it's unlikely that you are going to have economic stability. And all politicians love that expanded national government leadership. The only reason that it was not supported in total is simply because it was going to give Raila Odinga and President Kenyatta a leg up for the elections. And I suspect that whoever becomes the president, they'll pick pieces and bits and pieces of BBI content and have the same introduced in the National Assembly or the Senate. It's unfortunate that in Kenya, if you do not introduce the idea, you dismiss it, you say it's a bad thing. And also it's unfortunate that when Raila Odinga and President Kenyatta initially came up with the BBI, the handshake, they did it in a manner that excluded majority of the big political players. And you know, we must come to the realization and admit the fact that largely Kenya is a tribal society, and there's a lot of tribal sensitivities. So for you to make progress on any idea, you need to bring everybody to the table, you introduce the idea to the table, and then people take ownership. Because every single Kenyan has got insurable interest in our going concern. And that's why we must applaud and give anybody a pat in the back who comes up with ideas to make sure that we attain political stability. But more important is now the economic inclusivity. You know, now that's where people are beginning to cry. And as Javas has indicated, in mature democracies like in the US or the UK, people don't bother where the prime minister was born or brought up. They don't care where the vice president comes up, because they've got systems and institutions which work for the voters, which work for morale. But unfortunately, the situation which is obtaining in Kenya, when we elect these 130 officials, all of a sudden they become magicians and they preside over the allocation of resources to serve their selfish interest. For instance, if you go to Kisii or indeed Kakamega, you'll find that the people with resources today are the MCAs. When somebody gets elected an MCA, 6 months later, he's swimming in resources. So you begin to wonder, how did this happen? But now we come to realize that it's because, you know, they allocate resources to themselves. And in my view, if you address the issue of economic inclusivity, nobody would even be bothered to run for political office, because the systems will work. Okay, and I'd like us to hold the conversation on the BBI at that point. Whether or not reggae will continue remains to be seen. I can see a tweet here by Otenda Amolo immediately after the Supreme Court pronouncements, and he said on a tweet, reggae is back on immediately after elections. Whether or not that will happen remains to be seen. Let's now move on to the next discussion, and this has to do with the nominations headache that most of the big parties are facing currently, given the battlegrounds in different areas. For example,